Cybernation Uncensored.
Hello everyone. Sorry for the late reaction. It seems on camera I'm using OBS for the first time and I feel like I'm on an alien spaceship. So, welcome to, as one of our people in our chat put it, seeing you late at night, but here it's just talk nerdy to me. I am your perpetually disheveled host, Alex Maxwell, joined here on the floor by my cat, but more importantly, I have these lovely two hosts beside me. So, go ahead, please introduce ourselves. Starting with Gomi.
All right. I'm Gomi. I'm an Australian human, I suppose. I'm a tech head, and I've been, I suppose, playing around with all this sorts of stuff and following the news in that sort of area forever, pretty much. Background in engineering and computer science, and I just love embellishing myself in that sort of stuff. Remy?
It's my turn. By the way, not gonna lie, I am a dialect coach in one of my many day jobs, and so hearing you, I almost went, "Oh, it's more like I went into just pick a random dialect and go." But no, I am unfortunately, sadly American, living in Canada. But here I am. I'm excited to be here. I am the CEO of Realm Alternatives Productions, which is a women-owned, nerdy media production company focused all on gaming TTRPGs specifically, and producing Shadowrun content and running Kickstarters and producing audiobooks and all kinds of stuff. So you can find me over on twitch.tv/Master of Rem and on twitch.tv/GenCon TV on Thursdays. Hi.
And this, well, those of you who have been on CNU for a while, you guys can usually find me here on Saturdays with Team Nevermore as their solo. I am also one of the promotion managers with the brand. I'm coming up on my first year with them. It's almost our anniversary, Rob. But it's been a grand old time. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to, talk nerd stuff late at night for some of us, mid-afternoon for some others. But yeah, so I'm seeing my teammates in chat. But we've got a nice kind of like patisserie board of nerd stuff, be it tech and science, tabletop role-playing news and updates and discussion topics, and just nerdarchy in general. So we'll be going through these topics in a somewhat orderly fashion, riff off of each other whenever it comes appropriate. Chances are I'll have questions on either side because, as we talked about before, I've always loved Shadowrun. I have no idea how it works because my brain is too smooth. At least when I was a high schooler, and tech stuff is perpetually interesting to me. But since we talked about tech, why don't we just get on into it, right?
Dive in on there?
Yeah, dive in on that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, over the last, 3 months, the whole talk about AI has just sort of exploded. And, while I was busy on holidays, I just sort of kept seeing roll forward, and all sorts of things coming up from the absolute basics of, getting images and tweaking it and that sort of stuff. And so I just thought it'd be a good idea to start with a bit of a primer in the area, just to sort of get you a bit of an idea of how all this stuff works. The biggest, simplest way of looking at it is how ChatGPT actually works. And all it's trying to do is guess the next word. Now, because they've made the particular, I suppose, language model big enough, and we're talking terabytes of data here, it creates human-like chat. So if you prompt it appropriately, it can generate bullshit in an appropriate fashion. Because, and I'll provide a link to the 3-page cheat sheet I found on the stuff. But basically, it's trying to guess the next word. So whatever prompt you give it, it's going to spit back something in what you're looking for, basically. So the first critical thing is that train of thought has disappeared, is prompt engineering. like, how do you structure your language to create the right effect, to get the response you want? So leave it not just to my little waffle about ChatGPT, but I actually asked it, how many layers does it have in its neural network? So if you can bring up the first graphic, right?
Yeah.
The first critical thing is when you're talking a neural network, you're talking like a bunch of inputs. And this is the first layer, what they know as the input layer. And that's sort of like its senses. That's how it perceives the world. On the far other end, you've got the output layer. That's how it spits out stuff. And that's the decisions it makes. Then you've got multiple hidden layers in between there. And going from one of those little circles to the next one, there's a chance it'll trigger or not trigger. And then by triggering the whole network in one wave, getting to the far end, it'll choose what word to spit out. And the what they call the weightings on how it goes from one node to the next, that's all built out of the language model. And that's annoyingly complicated maths. And I don't have the brain to deal with that sort of stuff. But when I actually asked ChatGPT, how many layers do you actually have in your neural network? It gave me the stats of like 12 layers, 117 million parameters, which is the inputs to decide what comes out the other end. So it's a huge amount of stuff that can look at the structure of language that you fire at it before it decides its response. And I'll leave the full description it gives in here when it spits out, when we put up to the show notes. And the other side, of course, is the size of the language model. Now, this is based off the GPT-3 model, which is, according to this, 570 gigabytes worth of data, or about 45 trillion words. And this is not just like a dictionary. This is sentences, pieces of artwork in terms of literary writings and all that sort of stuff. So, as a basic level, it's really just like gazing into the abyss and getting it to fire back words at you and to try to comprehend them. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's seeing it like visualized in this way. This very similar to back when I went to college for game design, and this was a very similar model to how how questing trees would work. It looked like less non-Euclidean than this because there's less layers to it. No, but once I saw this visual when you provided it, I'm like, that's weirdly familiar. It's demystifying.
Core of it is really simple.
Go ahead,
it's
Harvey.
not for me, but I really like the description you did because I do not speak Decker, and so computers are magic and have feelings to me, and usually those feelings are angry. So no, I really liked the way that you explained it with visual aid. I can tell the teacher is coming out IRL. So.
Yeah.
I've had to explain these sorts of concepts for many a year. And I've learned how to translate geek to human, as in geeky IT speak into human. It's just, one of those things. But, ChatGPT is one of the many engines out there. I put a link into a website called Future Tools, and it has hundreds, and it's adding more every single day. And this goes from, the simple stuff, which is what ChatGPT is meant to be able to do, which is copywriting, summarization, et cetera, et cetera. But that particular thing has been then used in GitHub, some program called TaxKeeper that I've never heard of, which is meant to do your taxes and stuff, and Duolingo. So they're taking these language models and actually doing direct sort of useful applications for them. And this is comes with a really strong word of warning, is that because it's generating content, and so I got it to write just some sample pieces for games I know, like BattleTech and Cyberpunk. And reading through what it created, it looked right. But when you read into the detail, you go, wait a minute, that reference is wrong, or this part is wrong. So with the guys I work with, we went through and looked at some of this stuff, and it's really that whole idea of it looks about right. So it gives you that first draft, but you've got to come in as the expert and fix it.
Yeah.
So I can see there was a huge amount of worry about AI will take our jobs and all that sort of BS, which is a short Australian slang for bullshit. But it won't. It will actually amplify what we'll do, and we'll be able to do stuff quicker. So we can knock out a first draft. You can get, hey, write me a responsive email from a HR manager of 30 years apologising for not attending the meeting. And it will spit something out. And you can then go through it and contextualise it to the situation that's completely appropriate.
Yeah. Because this kind of like, cross bleeds into my segment of things where it was like one of like the, I can't remember the particular name. I'll have to go double check the actual source, but one of the like the larger like small time like indie publishing like zines, very similar to like Weird Tales, which is still one of the many, but one of the big ones where people go and send in like their short stories and novellas to get them published, to get their name out there. They've, for the first time since like the late 1920s or 1930s, they shut down applications just because people are just throwing the ChatGPT stuff in there, and they're like, we don't know if the person wrote this or this was written by a machine. And that's because like I submit my stuff to that and like, oh, I've got a thing I can submit, and it's like, we're shut down. God.
Yeah,
it's not taking my job. It's just it's that whole thing where there's like, now there's like, oh, we're not accepting things this time because ChatGPT has gummed up the works, and I took that personally.
Yeah. Look, there's things like that have happened. Two interesting things is that Paizo will not accept AI generated art, which is a good stand to have on it. And I think it was back in January I noticed on Reddit that the Dune subreddit had their own Butlerian jihad and had banned AI-generated content.
Love that reference, man. Solid Dune reference, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get better than that, really.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so, that's one text-based application for this whole AI thing. But you then go on and look at it where it kicks off even further. You would have seen the image generation stuff online, be it DALL-E 2, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, or countless others that are out there. And people are now taking these different models of generating images, mashing them together to see what other stuff they can produce. So it's getting a whole range of different things. Looking at that stuff personally, because I'm a teacher of multimedia, I'm going, well, I don't know where the copyright around this is, because to build the model, they went across the entire internet and grabbed a heap of content.
Yes.
They didn't have permission. And that then goes, well, yes, we just fed it into our model and there's none of the originals there, so we should be fine. But the thing is that Getty Images has stepped up and said, no, you're not, because we can see our logo and the stuff that you create. So this is something for the lawyers to sort out, honestly.
It is, and I'm
high grade.
So this is funny for me. Like, in doing this show, I try to like absorb and listen to multiple perspectives, and I largely stay quiet usually so that like I can absorb and understand whether like, what are the pros, what are the cons, who's into it, who's not. But you guys brought me here for my opinion, so you're gonna get it.
Yeah.
I'm unleashing now. So yeah, the thing with AI art and the content, I'm still kind of muddying and processing through. But with the art, it's like I have no problem with it if there's an opt-in. Like if there's an artist that doesn't have a lot of exposure that wants to maybe like, man, or data was available to be able to say like, man, this TTRPG company has used several of my images in AI to spit something else out, and so they really like my style. Maybe there's a partnership opportunity there. So to be able to opt in and say, yes, use my art to help me market myself and my skills, like I could see that, I can get on board with that. But the fact that it's just a web scraper at this point, that's just kind of running wild, like that's the part where it's like, you don't have permission. Somebody did work hard on this, and now you're taking it and not always accurately, with those AI images that have like 7 fingers and 15 heads that are all creepy and terrifying. But like that's still someone else started with that. Those leaves in the background, someone painted those leaves, or someone did digital art on those leaves, and now you just went, boop, my stuff.
Yeah.
So that's my hill to die on.
I agree. It's like the entire internet's built around this idea of just take, copy, use. When you look at a website, you get a full copy of it, and there's nothing to stop you keeping the contents. But the problem comes in, of course, selling it commercially, and that's where people kick up a stink, and rightly so. But there's a case a little while back of DeviantArt. They scraped their entire library of artwork and used it for their own models. And only later did they say, oh, no, you can actually opt out. But the thing is, because the model's built, they don't need to scrape again. So, and there's a big thing on ArtStation where everybody's labeling their stuff no AI so that it can sort of be excluded from appropriate models. So,
it's asking forgiveness rather than permission. It's like, oh, you can opt out. Yeah, but how many AI programs are there? And now it's all of a sudden, as an artist, my job to go find those places and find who has stolen my art so I can opt out of it. Like, no.
Do you know about, there's a password thing, Have I Been Pwned? I think it's the name of it, where you can find out whether or not your password has been, or your account has been hacked. And so you can find out whether or not you need to change your passwords and stuff. There's a similar service that's just cropped out that does the same for AI images. So you can actually verify whether or not your creations have been taken and used in models. Most of the models are based off the same stuff.
What's the link to that? Can you send me the link? Because, I'm going to blast that to friends.
I'll have to find it again because I can't remember it off the top of my head. I should have added it into my show notes. But just this conversation has reminded me that, this thing exists.
It's one of those things. Go ahead.
I was going to go into the text thing. So if you have something about the art, I defer to you, friend Alex.
It's the only time I myself, and when Midjourney especially first came out, it was like, let's have a look at it. It's like interesting, it's weird, and of course we were all laughing at the hand things. Like I know exactly why the hands are always messed up. Why does every single artist struggles with them? Like, at every levels, and if it's raking, just scraping the scum off of whatever is all over the internet, there's going to be so many. It's like there's like a massive percentile of people who have the screwed up hands in their artwork. So like one of my favorite bits of AI art I've ever seen was someone asked an AI generator to create a sign language guide. And it is absolutely Lovecraftian. It's like, and there's one where there's just way too many fingers are nowhere near enough. There's one where it's like a person signing, but then there's also like a hand that's like their mouth. It's horrendous and hilarious at the same time. It's very very Geiger, very it's very Cronenberg. But it's like I love that stuff. So that gave me a good giggle. But then I've also
I feel like we're in Jurassic Park mode where it's like no one stopped to ask if we should.
You're so busy asking yourself if you could. Just stop asking if you should. Yeah. But internet finds a way. No, but the one thing that I've seen, especially with like Midjourney, where it'll create like the four thumbnails. I've seen that not like taking like, oh, I'm using this art now, but like a painter friend who will like go and they'll ask for like forest, winter, like the sunset, and it'll create a color cue similar to that what you'd have in film. And so it's a very very rough, very muddy thumbnail of just like a color palette that is passable, so you're not spending the time color mixing. It'd be like
if you're looking at color palettes just as a thing, like you can go to Adobe Color.
Yeah,
people have put together thousands and thousands of color palettes. Mm-hmm. And you've got the same for lookup tables or LUTs for film production.
Yeah.
So they're getting AI to replicate stuff that's already been done.
Yeah, so it comes from God. Many time in finals, you're like when you're looking for reference or looking for a palette, and then you fall down a research hole, and you're there for like it's been 3 hours. Shit, I need to get to work. Yes. And so they can like generate this, and you have something that you can work off of, and just like color pick certain things from that. That's like the least offensive to me, and it's ones where like we're making some very weather appropriate, instead of again like digging through just various reference images or an Adobe library, have something be generated by by an algorithm, which they can then like, okay, that looks right, that this is a nice mix of color and wash, I can use this. But you're not robbing people's intellectual properties, poses, faces, spaghetti fingers, whatever.
Well, on the spaghetti finger part, AI accepting work from itself. That's just a simple meme that's floating around out there of its two almost hands shaking hands as it's accepting work, and it's a mess of fingers and God knows what else. So. Yeah.
But
and I do think what you were saying though, Alex, is there is even again like. So someone who can't draw or can't draw in a specific style or something like that, being able to say, build a concept again from opt-in art to say like, okay, I want something like this. Who are the artists that have elements of this in here? And then like maybe there is a collaborative thing where, Alex, I love the way that you draw hands shaking and it's not creepy. And then Gomi, I love the way that you do backgrounds. Can I get you both to work together on something? But again, it's kind of, if we could use that to help promote artists and find people, instead of me like drawing a stick figure tree and saying like, I want you to draw this, but it looks better. Like, there's art notes that artists hate.
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my cat. She's screaming at me for food. But when you look at it, one of the examples I saw a person use was to use the AI generator for concepting, to generate heaps and heaps of concepts, and then to be able to go take a couple of those concepts and go, yep, these are the ones I want to do, and I want to take that bit of that one, and then lay out their artwork and paint it up. So they're taking that as a point of inspiration, and this is where I can see the AI generator for digital art to be somewhat useful, because you're taking that as a point of inspiration, then you're creating your own art from the inspiration. Or if you're doing, say, an RPG product, you can use it for a heap of inspiration because it's kind of relevant, but then you can also look at the prompts you use to create that art, because it'll be in the style of such and such, or in the style of this or that, or you can go perusing ArtStation to find artists who reflect the styles you want and then make direct contact with them.
Yeah.
One of the, I suppose, not being overly artistic myself, if I was to go through and create a product, I would be making sure I use it on open sources and that sort of stuff. But I then want to track down artists and get a Kickstarter or funding campaign to happen to get them paid.
Yeah.
With all sorts of businesses, you get paid last, but you try and get the thing done. But also reaching back to your earlier point about the openness of the images, like stuff that's not people's stuff and they're happy to have it shared. If you look at the audio, there's a Google library called Music LM, which is a machine learning library that generates music. But, and this is the interesting point, with the AI, with the image stuff, they just grabbed it from the net. With the music stuff, they were very particular to stay within the bounds of copyright and only chose public domain sources, stuff that had fallen into it, because the copyright around the music industry is a lot stricter than the image side of things. Okay. So, it's kind of interesting to sort of see how that line is being drawn by the same company.
And I feel like with that, so that shows that someone has done the homework, right? Like someone has figured out the way that was the right way to do that, rather than like, hey, just going to launch this and oops, sorry for those that don't like it. Our bad. We're working on it. Here, we added an opt-out button. Like, you know how to do this right. And you chose not to.
Yeah. It's that, and that comes into like a a far bigger and far more cyberpunky a conversation of corporate overreach, et cetera, et cetera.
We are in dystopia.
We are in the lame dark timeline. We've got the dystopia, but none of the cool cyber limbs. Where's my chromed pancreas? But
they're coming, I promise.
Yeah.
They're coming
one day. But speaking of that, I think this because I can keep talking about AI, both like conjectural and what we have right in front of us forever, but we don't have forever for the show. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Remy, for our tabletop news.
I don't know how I didn't pay attention to this. It's just Rem. It's not Remy.
Oh,
just Rem.
Rem. There we go.
My company's name is Rem Alternus. It means alternate reality in Latin. That's all. So I think speaking of evil companies, let's talk about the OGL.
Oh boy! My neurons are activated. Take us away.
So segue there. Now, like at this point, of course, it's been resolved. There's so much content out there on what happened and all the steps of what WotC/Hasbro, pick your poison, did wrong. But I'm really interested in like more of what the end result is in terms of what this means for D&D, what this means for tabletop gaming in other venues, and how like WotC was just like, hey, we're making all this money, we're not making enough. How about we shoot ourselves in our own foot and let everyone else catch up with us? So, like, I kind of want to hear from you guys on how you're feeling about some of the creative gaming licenses and what's coming. Paizo talked about it. Green. I always say this wrong. Green Ronin. I always emphasize it wrong, so it sounds so white. But they're doing some really cool stuff with creative gaming licenses and stuff. And there's something brand. Yeah. And then there's something new coming from Catalyst Game Labs as well. And I'm not sure if this expands to Battletech or not yet, but I know it's coming for Shadowrun, where they are about to launch something called Hollow Streets, which is basically a creative gaming license partnered with Catalyst. So it's almost like you can build and play in our world, but you get a cut and we get a cut. And so they're like,
is that
gonna have a platform.
How the DMs Guild works over at Drive-Thru RPG?
So, in a way,
okay.
Yeah, it's like the DMs Guild takes about like half. If I can't recall if it's right off the top or after taxes, whatever, depending if you're shipping a hard copy or if it's purely PDF. But they usually take about like half of what like per sale too. That's the last time I had my finger on the pulse of this. Once the whole thing once they brake checked and stopped, I stopped being in a perpetual sense of panicked rage. I've got things to say about this, so go ahead and.
Oh, okay. I mean, I suppose I stopped regularly playing D&D when it was 2nd edition, so this is a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
The most recent fantasy campaign I played in was a friend's son's Pathfinder campaign. It wasn't Rise of the Rune Lords. It was the one where you found a kingdom. I can't remember the name of it now.
Kingmaker.
Yes, Kingmaker. And we've got like 1, maybe 2 sessions to go. And thanks to COVID, it's been on a hiatus for 3 years. The DM has basically getting to the close of finishing his degree, which he hadn't started when we were last played this. So, shit happens basically. But I mean, there's also, I signed on to the Black Flag project from Kobold Press, who are also signing on to the Orc license or the open something creative license. I can't remember what it stands for.
Open role playing creative license.
Yeah.
Is that it? Because I always just get excited by the word orc and leave it alone.
Yeah.
The time of the orc has come. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, most of my interest has really fallen in the sci-fi end of the genre. I mean, I'm a big cyberpunk nerd, and I have been since the early 90s. Before that, it was Shadowrun first and second edition. And then since then, I've sort of, I've had moments in Traveller, and I've been in and out of the Battletech universe heaps of times. About a decade ago, I was training both my children up in how to play the tabletop, and got their friends into it as well. So just trying to, that's sort of, I suppose, where I am. Is I've already migrated away from 5e. I've never actually played 5e, so I don't feel I've got much of a stake in the conversation.
Right. All right. Well, then, I mean, it's nice to have an objective person that's like watching from a distance. Is like, I see what's happening here. Meanwhile, Alex and I can be the ones that rage, I guess.
Because it was September of last year where I broke out as being part of like an indie published, in like the tabletop role playing community. Those of you that do play 5e still, or if you play OSR, it's called Raven's Rook. It's if you want the Cyberpunk feel, but you like fantasy, just like more like grounded fantasy instead. Check out Raven's Rook, the City of Brigands and Bandits. I edited for it and did some writing on it. You can find it on DriveThruRPG. But it released in September. My bosses, Tony, Will, I love you. You guys come by on Odyssey. You're grognards. They don't know how to social media at all. At the time, I didn't know how to social media at all either. This was coming out of quarantine. I was basically a feral person at that point. I wasn't reintroduced into proper society. So, but it came to a point where we're making some sales. The Kickstarter went well, and then the OGL happened, and we were right when we were getting ready to have the print release out and ready, and so the entire future of the book just went just dust in the wind, and we were all. It was every day just became like, what are we doing, guys? Like, do we take it down before is this a thing? What do we do? What are we doing? Like, because it was dual slotted for OSR and 5e, so OSR had like a bit more leeway on it because that leans more into like the old OGL that Paizo's in. But it was a lot of late and sweaty nights just worrying about like what my primary source of income was going to be if all this crap happened, because that was like like writing with Wicked Studios, that was how I was buying my insulin and getting my groceries. And then that was like
terrifying.
Yeah, it's like, hey, the meds that are really expensive anyway. Maybe you can't afford them. It's like, oh, good. I guess I'll go back and be a range safety officer or something. That'll be fun. But I was rabid.
Well, and not even for what WotC and Hasbro, what they were doing to the indie publishing and what that could mean for their sales, but also shooting themselves in the foot with their fan base. So then, fans, like, you get punished from both ends. You get punished from the WotC end, and you get punished from the customer base, who's now like, well, screw D&D, I'm never doing this again. And it's like, but wait, I don't suck. Like,
and the fact that it happened directly after the complete botched release and like business approach with MTG 30th, like the 30th anniversary of Magic the Gathering, and that was, they shot themselves in the foot with a 12 gauge shotgun. Like, there's no foot left on that leg. And then then they went like, maybe it'll be different on this one, and they just pump it and do it again. So like,
yeah.
And not to mention what happened with Hadazee, the Hadazee race that they introduced. Like, it's like 2022. They were like, right, what are our plans to suck the worst? Like,
yeah.
So, like, it's not just one mess up. It's been a series of mess ups. And, I feel for the people at Wizards who, like, are roped into this because the evil corporate overlords are saying like, well, we're cyberpunk dystopia and we need to make more money. And they're like, but our fan base will get pissed.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, but more money. And it's like, don't do this. And they're like, yeah, but more money. And then they're like, oh no, what happened? We didn't know. But in terms of like, I run a community of live streamers and gamers and role players, and we do a learn to play program. We play D&D on our streams. We have a comic book that's steampunk fantasy, and we do an actual play that takes place in that world using D&D 5e rules. And we have like an all black cast that does Descent into Avernus. And like 5e has been such a core of who we are. But it's also like, no matter as mad as we get at WotC and how we want to watch our spending, or like in terms of me and my community, how we want to watch our spending and not support the evil cyberpunk overlords. At the same time, like D&D is a mental and emotional release for some people that like, we don't want to take that away from our audience if they have a need for that and they like, this was something that was helping them as people get through the real life. We don't want to take that away. But I think also for the people that are mad and are hurt and do want to walk away from D&D, like there are so many options out there. And so we're kind of taking that stance of like, we're going to do both. We're going to try to actively not go out and buy every D&D book that we see now, for the new campaigns and stuff like that. But we're going to take what's existing and what we already have and make sure that there's still a safe space and a sense of community for those who need it, while making other options available. So like our Learn to Play was just D&D. We're now going to be doing like Shadowrun, Learn to Play. We're going to be doing Thirsty Sword Lesbians or Fifth Season or whatever the heck we feel like, as long as there's another option for those who need to step away.
Having multiple options, I think, is a great thing, because having migrated away from D&D ages ago, I've seen all these different options pop up, and like I picked up a copy of Fate and read through it, and I really enjoyed it, and I like aspects of it, and I look at other aspects and go, oh, I see it as something for experienced role players, because just sort of the step up to that level of creativity. Having run Mage the Ascension for a couple of years, the hardest thing I found was for one of the players explaining the magic rules every session, because that requires a certain level of creativity with the framework of how the magic works. But I look at the magic system there and go, that's an amazing magic system, but it's also balanced within the world. Then looking at sort of the Paizo stuff, that just feels like a D&D clone, but there's nuances and differences in there that give you a little bit more crunch that tie into the 3rd edition 3.5e version of D&D. And this whole OSR renaissance has been great to see emerge and evolve, because there's just so many options on the table now that you don't have to try and cludge together your own version of the game or bring in multiple house rules from wherever. It's actually this debacle, I suppose, has caused more people to start exploring different options. And from my perspective, I think that's going to enrich the community in the long term. I don't know how WotC is going to recover from this, but I'm certain they've got plans. I mean, they've got people to help work with this stuff for them. And so having seen, some of the games I started with grow, evolve a little bit, and then just sort of trail off, and others that have sort of pitted along in the background and now exploding to prominence again, because it seems like the Battletech community is just sort of exploding over the last couple of years. Watching the ebb and flow of game systems, where one thing's popular then another thing's popular, and that sort of stuff.
It's the go ahead, finish your thought.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, like with Cyberpunk Red, having been an old Cyberpunk player, I really love the dystopian nature of the world and how the tech is done. And our local gaming groups, we had our own different take on it, as every group does. But gaming itself is a very creative enterprise, the reason I know anything about creativity is because I've played lots of D&D, and we've gone through absolutely mad situations, things like convincing a dragon to spare some of its blood so we can time travel, and things that you just weird like that. But anyhow, sorry, you have a...
It's the one thing that I guess that always kind of struck me as very strange, because I came up playing 3.0, 3.5, and I got into a lot of like Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf and Cyberpunk in high school, as everyone who had a teenage goth phase did.
Yes.
But it was like growing up like in the like when before like tabletop was chic and cool. Let's get my cane and feel like an old grog nerd for a second. No, but like there's like this whole thing of like people saying like, you can take my 5e over my cold dead hands. Like, not a thing that has ever really like been a precedent. And now there's so many, especially like people that are like new into the hobby and came in and saw like the capstone of the pyramid as it previously was, and over quarantine was 5th edition D&D, and people just went all into it. And it's like, yeah, and I mean, I played the campaign once as a player, and that's a horror story for a different time. I've been a GM ever since, because I was like, that's never happening again. But it was it's I've had the same games like Sunday game group for 8 years. Yeah, I've been GMing for them all kinds of campaigns, and it did take this and also edgerunners coming out for them to be like, oh, that Cyberpunk, you talked about that, let's try that. I'm like, oh, it was the show, wasn't it? Yeah. But it's seeing like the return to like the older status quo of like, yeah, let's try different games. And this is if there's any GMs, DMs, players, whoever watching this, as someone who has spent probably way too much money on tabletop books of any system. Many of them I will probably never play, but I've read through. Variety will make your favorite game better. Learning different systems and seeing how different systems work and interact with the various goblin gems that you have in your collection. Taking that and applying them, once you understand them a bit, to your favorite game or games, will vastly improve their experience. Like once I got my hands back into Cyberpunk with Red, and I understood how that worked, I'm like, Reputation, I love that. And so like, and just using that as a sliding scale for my games, whether they're playing like my 1920s like potion prohibition game, or they're doing some like Regency thing, like having like a sliding scale of reputation and how people can perceive them. That's changed my game.
Rep is a great idea, because I love the way that you've got this reputation here, and then you've got your character skills. So you have style over substance. And they're separate things that you can make happen. Like I've had a group of players, and they had a media who was basically selling the story, and that was what the media was doing while they were doing their thing. And some of them were completely inept; others were brilliant at what they were doing. So, diving into other game systems is brilliant, because every game system has a really cool idea it has on offer. I used to play and run Rollmaster, which is an archaic, highly complicated game written by accountants for mathematicians. Trust me on this one. But inside it had some really cool ideas, and this came out in 81. And so the cool idea, of course, is that any character can pursue any part. So you can have fighters casting spells. Of course, it's very difficult for them, but the thing is, it opened up the door to saying, well, your character is not the stereotype. And then, of course, to make combat more dramatic, you've got critical hits. And these are not like, oh, right, you're just being injured. No. I had, in one game I was playing with, my character had to face down a troll, and I got extremely lucky, and I spent 2 rounds standing in the corridor going, hey, who needs my help? Because I didn't know what to do. Until one of the other players got his knee blown out by a powered-down lightning bolt called a shock bolt. And because he was up on the roof with spells, that spell had like half a minute to go before it ran out. So he crawled across the roof and down the wall to avoid falling and splatting the 30 feet down from the dungeon roof. And so that creates wonderful chaotic drama in your situations. And as an idea, that's something that I feel that Core 5e lacks. But, Red has got it in its crit hit subsystem.
I feel like 5e, though, is, and especially because of Critical Role, like, I mean, TTRPGs have blown up because of the era of Critical Role and stuff like that. So all of a sudden it's mainstream. All of a sudden people love D&D because that's what Critical Role and Matt Mercer does. And so it is it's great baby food before you get like solid food, where like if you've never played a RPG, it is crunchy enough to be intimidating to a new gamer, but it's also soft enough where, like, gosh, I run a D&D game, a home game every Tuesday for like friends from my past that I just never wanted to lose touch with. And like we've been playing for over a year, and I still, every single time that we roll initiative, it's like action, bonus action, movement, free action, next person's turn, action, bonus action, free action, move. Like you got to still say it every time because they're like still confused and still a little like timid about it. But I think like once they get it and once they start like getting passionate about it, that's when you can start opening the door into other things. And I wasn't feeling well one day, so or I didn't have something prepped, I don't remember. So I was like, can we play Misspent Youth? And we played, a punk teen game of fighting against authority instead of D&D. And like, they really got into it. And so seeing some of those different worlds and different systems will make them start to question like what else is out there and how do I be part of it? And especially because I'm just on a roll now, like now is the era of games that are expanding into other fandoms that we love, where like, yes, there's Cyberpunk and stuff like that, but there is also Avatar: The Last Airbender now. There is fifth season, which just finished on BackerKit as a crowdfunding campaign, which was based on N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy. Like there is so much out there. Like if you love any world, like probably there's someone trying to make an RPG of it.
Yeah, you can probably find it somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the great thing about of having this range of RPGs is that you can dive into other worlds, and even if you, I don't know, dip into a book and take some really cool ideas, you can then add it to the game world you're running, and that's part of the joy of actually throwing this stuff together. So yeah.
I told you guys my cat would probably want to come up, but here he is. Hey.
Yay! And then, of course, as like you mentioned, Gomi, like the fandoms that ebb and flow and change and stuff like that. So I was getting into Shadowrun when BattleTech was about to launch Clan Invasion, and that did $2.4 million. And now at Adepticon this year, they're going to be launching their Mercenaries campaign. And like I've heard that their fan base has quadrupled since Clan Invasion. So
it seems to have exploded. And look, I'm definitely signing on to that one because I love the earlier eras before the Clan Invasion, just personally, but the entire universe is really expansive. It's got some really interesting, I suppose, hardware for tech nerds, and it's a war game base, but it's also got the role-playing aspect of a really rich universe. For a sci-fi universe, there's a couple of them out there, but it's it's delved into the history of science fiction, grabbing its roots from giant mecha anime and stuff like that.
It was explained to me because at first, so I have an ex that works for Games Workshop, and so it was for me, like he left a bad taste in my mouth of Warhammer. And so when I see big stompy robots anywhere, I'm like, ugh. But then they were like, yeah, but it's big stompy robots meets Game of Thrones. And I was like, what? Like, so when you start to appeal again, it's that like, you might see something where you're like, I don't know if that's for me. And then you find like anything out about it and you're like, okay, I could see where that could, even if I get into it and it's not my like world, there's something you can take from it and insert into your own systems and games and stuff like that. And you know, I'll always talk about Shadowrun as an example, but like you always have the Mr. Johnson, you always have the big evil corporation. Put that into D&D, like,
Yes.
and now you've made your world more complex, where it's not just like there's a dragon tormenting the city and you must save the city. It's also like, okay, but like, is there, or is the king just manipulating? You know, like there's all kinds of
It adds this wonderful
nuance and
second
intrigue.
layer to going on. So yeah.
And you guys were talking like highbrow changes. My player group lost their goddamn minds when the half-orc thug just pulled a sawed-off shotgun out of his jacket. I'm like, wait, what the hell? Yeah, and he's popped it open, loading like solid silver shells, and it shot thunderbolts. Like, I want one of those. But yes, I worked with firearms for a while. I'm a bit of a gun nut, and I love historical firearms. But there's also was it King Square? Hi Nick. It's one of my teammates on Team Nevermore. He had a great thing back in the chat. If I didn't miss it too far, but it was the 5e is it's a great entry level RPG. It's not so rules light that it's like only for one shots. But it's a Ram, as you said, it's just has enough crunch to it. It's you guys put it far more tasty than I have, where 5e is it's the gateway drug to tabletop role playing games. You take it like, is there something harder? Like, this it's like this,
or is there something more flavorful?
Yeah.
Or is there something like more story based?
Yeah, that's right. Because the sommelier who's like, would you like to try something from this vintage? But it's flavors and spice of life. That's
all the explosion of colors that Remy has in Ratatouille, of when he mixes two flavors.
Yeah.
And you've got, what got me started on Cyberpunk was the fact that you had Shadowrun, which was magic elves mixed with dystopian future, and just mashed together into this like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird, but let's have a look. And that got sort of me started.
I love Shadowrun lore. So we'll get into when we get to my segment after, because Rem, you wanted to talk about some cons before we switch over?
I want to make sure there's time so I can talk about cons next next time if we need to. But I do want to say, like, for March, the end of the month is huge. So like in one weekend, there's like PAX East, Adepticon, GaryCon, and there's something else. But I know that Adepticon in Chicago, for those going, Catalyst is going, and they're doing the BattleTech launch of the Kickstarter there. But more importantly, if you're going to GaryCon, I'm going to be there. So like, say hi.
It's unless I have my calendars wrong or they changed it since quarantine. End of March, beginning of April is WonderCon over here in sunny California. I still, because like that's usually where I would get my birthday drinks at like the hotel lobby there, because I always lined up April 1st, baby. But
well, down in Victoria, Australia, we have Conquest running in over Easter, the long weekend.
Ooh.
I haven't checked the address because they've moved it again, but you should be able to find it on their website, and all the games are up, what will be running and that sort of stuff.
All right, excellent. So we're going a little over an hour, but we've got enough gas in the tank where I can just wrap us up on just general geek and culture news. Sure. It's blue. So I had to, full disclosure, I had to change my my notes for what I was going to be talking about a few times because things just kept happening. So I'm gonna start out with a big one, especially in correlation with Cybernation Uncensored, since we've got good friends Modifius, and we've had a few streams with Fallout 2D20. There's been some big Fallout leaks regarding the show. A lot of images that have me excited, but also because it's of who's making it, Prime Video. I want it to be good, but like Peripheral is decent, The Boys is really good, but Prime Video has hurt me personally with Wheel of Time and Rings of Power, especially Wheel of Time. They did my favorite character really dirty in that. But the thing is, like, I've got some images here. Let me just. There we go. Let's find the overlays. So, for I guess we'll start with the big one. One of the big ones is we have a location for it. From photos on set that have come down. If you know, you know. I'm not surprised that Prime Video has gone. That's a popular game. So we're getting it in the NCR. And as being a resident Californian, I'm happy. Going in deeper, we've got some images from 2 vaults, from set pieces. This is the interior of Vault 33, which I believe is going to be for our protagonist. And those of you who are like in the deep lore of Fallout, it's vaults 1 through 34 are more West Coast based, with 34 being more inland Mojave. But there's one of my favorites also is the red rocket. Looks so good, like straight out of the game. I'm trying not to get too hype because the Wheel of Time looked amazing. Like the casting was perfect, the costumes immaculate, the props like not exactly how I imagined them in the books, but still really good. And then the show happened, and I was like, "That's come on, man!" But but so like it's not a book to film translation. It's a video game to film translation, which in their own right have not had the best track record. But be that as it may, I'm going to be cautiously optimistic, and as I encourage everyone else to be. Anyone who's a fan of Fallout, of course you want this to be good. You're a fan of science fiction, of course you want this to be good. They scrubbed a lot of the better images I was looking for. They also had a Brotherhood of Steel piece of power armor, and that boy thick. The scale of it is it's so much bigger and robust than what we saw in the games. And also it's the fact that it's practical effects instead of CG schlock.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm sure they're gonna doctor it up with like some stuff in post, as you normally do for these things. Back to Wheel of Time, the Trollocs looked good. They're guys in basically fursuits, and that they just made look really lively and powerful and in motion in the show, and they were one of the cool looking things in it. But after that, going from one thing that has me going maybe to something that's kind of sticking in my craw a bit. This is something I just found out about this week. Was Warner Brothers wants to give Lord of the Rings the Star Wars treatment.
Okay. What do they mean by that?
So they want to, because it's been almost 20 years since.
I was gonna say don't say it, but I was too slow. Like
it's been a while since the Lord of the Rings movies came out. And I mean, if you guys are like me and you're in a similar age bracket as me, it came out during like the golden medium of impressionability of your life. And if you're like me, you probably you look like
I raised both my children on good orcish violence.
Good. Okay.
They
you look 30 to me. So
attackers had watched that movie a number of times.
Yeah.
When we saw Return of the King, when we saw Return of the King, my wife was heavily pregnant, but we will guarantee we're getting the extended editions.
Oh yeah,
because I mean, both of us grew up reading the books regularly, and just having that caliber of actors in that movie, it's like, oh my god, I have to see this. And the fact they got Alan Lee and John Howe to be their concept artists, the pinnacle of art visualization for the Tolkien universe, and they've got those guys to be the concept artists for the movie. They did so much right in that. In Lord of the Rings, and
also you had someone who's been who had been trying to get land that seat as the director, Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson, he's he doesn't have an immaculate, or he like resume. He's had some, his non-Lord of the Rings stuff has not done as well. It's cinematically still very good.
Have you seen Brain Dead?
No, no.
It's a B-grade horror movie from one of his first.
Yes, because I still respect the hell out of the guy, because again, there's not many films that I watch once a year, and it sounds like you guys do that too. And I don't know if you guys have, but every time it's like, oh, now you've got it in like, in HD DVD. Now it's in Blu-ray. Now it's in 4K. So I've bought the extended edition like 4 times.
Yeah.
One of my favorite watchings was this past year, actually, because I took my best friend to Gen Con, and she's one of the people that I play in my D&D campaign, and have to say action, bonus action, movement, free action. So like as she was getting this and like kind of getting her feet under her, I visited her last summer and we watched, she made me binge watch all of Stranger Things, which is fine. I was good with that. And then I was like, now it's my turn. And we watched all 3 Lord of the Rings. Like she started putting the D&D spin on it, where when Gandalf is like, this foe is beyond all of you, it's like they're too low level.
Yeah.
So being able to see that and start to say like, man, this is a heavy role play session, when they're all arguing and stuff like that versus fighting. And
yeah, I love that. My group is the same things, and we always bring like a Hobbit food for snackage, because you need your 3 square meals if you're watching that. That's but
that's a full day commitment.
Oh yeah, no, it's a whole day commitment. Yeah, get your snacks, your drinks, and of course you have myself and a few others that again it's always like Saruman the White, Saruman the Fool, and it's always going with voices and everything. It's always the GMs that are sitting there watching the movie that just that will do the voice and everything else. But with the Warner Brothers wants to approach this new generation of they only have the rights to the Third Age Lord of the Rings, so the stuff that's within the Hobbit and the Hobbit Rings of Power is Second Age. So it's this weird thing where they say they want to get the Star Wars treatment, so it's like, oh, are we going to be getting like an Aragorn show, or like the Legolas films? Are we going to? There's already been like, oh, it's a Tom Bombadil film starring James Gordon. I'm like, you take that back. There was nothing made me wake up faster, like no cup of coffee, Turkish or otherwise, when I'm going through like do my morning boot up and I see that on my Twitter feed. Like, no, I'm not awake yet. Wake me up.
Wake me up nicely.
Yeah, but it's because you don't need to remake film perfection. It's this in film perfection being like the Lord of the Rings films and the 1999 masterpiece of The Mummy. You don't need to remake those. Yes. Those are perfect films.
Or the 1982 version of The Thing.
That too. Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
There's absolute classics going all the way back that you go, yeah, why don't we just not touch that one?
Yeah, it's like it's perfect. Leave it be. That's fine. There's
honestly to me, the remakes are lazy too, where it's like, okay, this world, Middle Earth, is so vast and diverse. If you want to play more in that world, absolutely, but don't tell the same story of The Ring. Like, that's done, and it was great, and we loved it. But now, like, dive into like the how the elves arrived, or the dwarven the mines of Moria before what happened. Like, I want to see more of that. I want to see more world building. And if you're not creative enough to write that, then don't do it.
There's bucket loads of resources out there around it, because like my second game system I ever got was Middle-earth Roleplay, the precursor to Rollmaster.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I remember out of that, there's this gorgeous little dwarven hill fort nestled in the west side of the Misty Mountains before you get to Rivendell, between that and Bree. And it was just this small module. But the thing is, it worked so much to create the feel and, I mean, the art style. I can't remember the name of the artist who did a lot of the artwork for it. somebody with Brian, I think. But regardless, they went to great lengths and scholarship to feed in as much as they could to really create that vibrant world. And when you look at all the game systems that have really knocked it out of the park, or the fantasy universes, they're the ones that have that extra layer of depth. Why did people connect so well with Game of Thrones? Because it was a fantasy version of the Tudor War of the Roses, you know, and it had a very fleshed out history. And yes, it tried to shock you, but it also had a good richness to it. Tolkien, he created, what, half a dozen different languages before he decided to write the books? You know,
I would also argue that with Game of Thrones as an example, the other reason we watch it, or I watch it, is because I'm a spiteful bitch, and if all of the good characters are going to be like horrifically punished, then I was in that for as long as I was, because I was just like, come on, like I want to watch you get punished. Like I was
Where's
in
my
it
karma?
for so long.
Yeah.
And I waited so long.
Because and saying that there is such a richness in this, you know, things that like, and watching Rings of Power, you know, again, as Amazon does, the costumes and sets were,
production values are way over the top.
Oh yeah, I mean, sadly, they market it on the $1 billion TV show. I'm like, that's all you're using for marketing, and that's not a good sign. But but it was that, like the production value did show through. And I know the Tolkien estate can be hard to work with at times, because there was one of those things where there is an elf and human romance, and it's like, oh, when there's warnings about this, like you mentioned Beren and Luthien, right? Damn now, or I am going outside. And they didn't. I went outside. I had to walk it off. And like a Beren Luthien film would just be like ugly. I would ugly cry. But I can wax eloquent about Lord of the Rings. 5 ever. I still have other things I need to get through.
You will not have a problem here, but I think we have other things to talk about, don't we?
Yeah, since we're I'll touch very briefly on the film review I have slotted for this, because sadly, it's not too memorable. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. It was very fun. But it was style over substance, but not in like the good cyberpunk way. It gave up a lot of what made Ant-Man such a breath of fresh air when it came out in the MCU, and then Ant-Man and the Wasp following on it. They were a change of like the superhero formula. They were heist films, which I was like, oh my god, my mind's blown. And we have a more standard, normal superhero film.
The pity. I mean, one of the things I really enjoyed about Captain America and the Winter Soldier was it was the flavor of an 80s style spy movie.
Yeah.
You know, that covert action kind of stuff going on and revealing the dark and deeper plot and that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah, no. When they break the superhero mold is when they do their best stuff. But sadly this was very like return to form. The family dynamic didn't land. It's like things just kind of like happened. If it wasn't for Jonathan Majors, the actor for the titular antagonist, who I believe is going to be the big bad evil guy for this current arc.
This is Kang?
Yeah, it's Kang the Conqueror. I'm glad they got him fit, because like, you know, I watched him in Lovecraft Country. He was built, and now he's jacked, he's huge. Obviously, because they had to carry that whole goddamn movie. But without him, it would not have done as well. Regardless of, it's like I would put if I gave the film like a color scale, it falls kind of like the beige plastic box, like Tupperware mediocre.
Having survived the 80s and the beige computers before they all went black and stylish, yes, I can understand that.
Yes, it was like it's one of those things where like the art book and like seeing like the concept art used and not is going to be super fun to look at in its own right. The designs of creatures, vehicles, weapons, etc. Like the design team blew it out of the park. It was awesome. Jonathan Majors, great. You know, Paul Rudd, he's a saint and is he filled out his mitzvah decks, and he's immortal. But it's the thing I took away from it is like they have the perfect guy playing Kang, because he sold like that towering menace that Kang had in the comics, and I'm looking forward to seeing him more. Is that he's a glimpse of what can be really good, of what is currently in the post Thanos struggle. There's a lot of lands, a lot of landing flat and a few landing on their feet.
Yeah. I mean, there was a huge build up to Thanos, and it made that such a huge, massive event. And then to try and replicate that experience again,
but a lot
after
faster.
having Thanos, and a lot faster, that's a challenge. And having seen stuff where I've watched movies and gone, oh, this just needed another run through of the script, or they just needed to work it a bit more, or in this situation, why wouldn't you do that, and kind of stuff. And it's like, if I can think, oh, why wouldn't this happen, then I'm not a scriptwriter or anything, but it's like most people could be thinking that sort of thing. And really, you look at the way Pixar goes through and develops their scripts, they may give it 6 to 18 months lead time before they make the decision of whether or not to produce the movie. So this is, concepting, script writing, ideas before they pull on the entire animation team to run with it. And I've seen a couple of things that have been, oh yeah, in a couple of years' time, this is going to be coming out, and then it never does, because they've decided, like, yeah, that's just it. That needs a lot more work. We're just not going to run with that this time, and it may evolve and change into something else.
And you're 100% there. And I was thinking this to myself when Alex was talking too, where it's like, I've thought like 7 times during our conversation tonight, like the same Jurassic Park reference where they didn't stop to think whether they should, but like it's the capitalistic deadline, like, we want this to come out this date and make us more money, and we don't care if the art is right, we don't care what it does to the fan base, we want this date because date. And that's what I see with a lot of this, and a lot of your feedback too, where Alex, where it was like, if they had taken their time to really get it right, like, okay, you had all through the Thanos arc down, and then it feels like, instead of catching your breath, instead of taking your time, instead of recovering from the loss of Tony and where you're going to go next and who's going to be your big bad and how are you going to kind of emotionally recover with your audience and get them, like, plant the seeds for the next thing to come, take your time.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the thing is,
I don't need a new Marvel movie every other month. Like,
no.
I can wait. I can do it.
And people are willing to wait if it's good. Stuff gets judged on the quality of the writing, the artwork, the production values. Now, production values, I think it was The Life of Pi, the big budget movie, the CGI company won the Academy Award for that. And 2 months later, they went into bankruptcy because the company that they had signed the contract with said, no, you've got to do all this extra work to make it up to scratch, which won them the award. But it also bankrupted the company. So part of the model sitting in the background there, I think, doesn't work for artists appropriately. But what I want to say, just for your story side of things, is having that pause, taking that breath before you dive into the next part of the storm or you face the next occurrence, that you have a little bit of world building. Not every game session has to be facing down a big bad, but it can be hijinks in the tavern or something light, fluffy, and comic. Personally, I quite enjoyed WandaVision. The initial half of it, because it was taking the TV format from the 50s through to the 2000s and experimenting with it.
Yeah, and it was,
as she was going through her neurosis.
And it was as we're talking about recovering like emotionally with the audience. That whole show is about grief and how to cope with it. And that was like they planned this out, and also like this happened during that particular time period during global history when everyone kind of needed some coping. It came out at a perfect time. And it's one of those things where like some of the other shows, like I was at Winter Soldier and the Falcon, should have been a movie, because there's a lot of just like bloat. They didn't take the time to trim the fat off all the scenes.
I've
But
heard people online comment that it's like, oh, you've got this movie idea, great, we'll turn it into a TV series of 10 or 12 episodes. So back and forth. I was just looking at the chat, and somebody's going to have words with us about Quantum Mania being the best from Phase 4. I don't know. I haven't seen it.
And it's Phase. I mean, the best from Phase 4 that's not a very high bar. I guess it depends what phase are we in. The Quantum Mania is definitely one of the better ones in this current phase, but it's rubbing shoulders with the rest of the films, which is like, but it's a lot of these opinions are purely objective. But it was one of those things where I came away from that movie being like, I can't remember a lot. I'm also not trying to talk spoilers for those who want to go see it for themselves and conduct your own opinions, because that's
what I'm thinking of doing down the track. So,
Yeah. So it's definitely watch it once at the very least.
And know your audience, because gosh, when Lord of the Rings came out, when Hunger Games came out, when Harry Potter's came out, it was always, you left the movie theater I have to wait 3.5 years for the next one, but I am going to put it on my calendar today. We're willing to wait. We are on the hook. Do us justice, or else we lose that, where it's I don't know if I'm going to see the next one because they're losing it,
Yeah,
there's been a huge flood of content. There's been that many offerings from Disney around the MCU. I mean, I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed and burnt out by it, really.
That's actually, this ties directly into one of my other talking points, which is it started in 2020. Again, I can't imagine what, but where the major 7 publishing houses, Marvel, DC, Image, IDW, Boom, Dark House, and Dynamite, they all had a rise in sales, but nowhere near as high as independent comics. I think a lot of that ties to this superhero fatigue. You have every single film quarter, you've got a Marvel film, whether you like Marvel or not, it's there. And then you also probably have you'll have a DC film that happens, and also then on top of that you have The Boys, which again, The Boys is different enough, but also if you're more squeamish, or it's you don't want to, that's not your flavor of superhero story, I understand that. Same with Invincible, right? But there's this, everywhere you look there's superhero something, and that's the majority of primary published comics, and that's where the others. And I should note that the metrics I was looking at, others was not taking into account things like manga or variants or etc. These were just small, very small independent publishers that just took off, because they tend to be very out there in various different ways. One of my favorites that I read each of these probably twice each through quarantine was The Ghost of the Gulag, especially because Ghost of the Gulag, you can read it, the whole thing, for free on the guy's website. But then also Black Sad and Gypsy Star. Gypsy Star I found through Heavy Metal Magazine, and Black Sad because I've got art friends or high artists, and it's it approaches race and religion in the 1950s through the gaze of animals. I'm that sounds like Animal Farm, and then it's noir. I'm yes.
Wow, that's interesting. I mean, that's the thing. Independent publishers can go these interesting combinations, get them out there and that sort of stuff. But I have to ask, is heavy metal still running? Because I lost track of it years ago.
So have I. I found it when I found the just a sip of it that was in an old heavy metal I had, just because my mentor collected them, and he moved to Canada, and he's I don't want to pack these here, take them. And I was just had this sheaf of old heavy metals, and I found this one. I'm oh, this is for those who don't know, the Gypsy Star, it's Cyberpunk ice road truckers. It's very Pond Smith meets Max Rocktansky, but you replace all of the sand in the outback, and it's just snow cold north. It's really cool. Read it. It's if you want to, it's a lot of fun. But yeah, I was I just got an omnibus of it, and that was a lot of fun. And it's small. A lot of them are European, usually French or more like Eastern Bloc. You know,
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that Mobius came up in heavy metal years back before it became, I suppose, more widespread over here in this direction. So, and seeing what other people are creating and putting out there as stories is really, really interesting because, I mean, at its core, what we're doing in gaming is really just storytelling. We have a system to sort of help push that story or help create boundaries around it. Like Call of Cthulhu is really good with its sand mechanic to limit that you going and discovering all these hidden secrets at the cost of your own mind kind of thing. So it creates that wonderful tension in the game. And a good storyteller can craft a story that you get to the end of it and go, oh, hell. And it sort of gets you thinking or gets you engaged with it. That's one of the reasons I like Neil Gaiman and stuff he's done.
Oh, let's talk about an artiste. Yeah. Neil Gaiman's I found him very late. Sadly, I first discovered him when a friend of mine gifted me was it American Gods, because I love urban fantasy stuff, and she was like, "Here, give this a read."
Have you read the Dresden Files then?
Oh yes.
Good.
If it wasn't for the Dresden Files, I would not be married to who I was married to. She introduced me to them, and that was the rest is history.
Yeah.
We play a Dresden Files RPG on Mondays on my channel, and
Cool.
Yep.
they're so obsessed with it.
Oh yeah, no, it's Michael Carpenter is the best boy, and I will not be taking any questions at this time.
Having read, I read through the entire series up to date, and then I went back and decided to reread it, and I found Easter eggs, and it's like, oh my god, this was planned.
Oh yeah,
and even getting to book 10 changes. By the end of it, yes, it had me in tears again, even though I knew it was coming.
Everything. It's funny though, going back and reading, like I felt like I got to watch him grow up as an author because the first 3 books are not well written.
They're
like the
rough.
stakes are still high. It's still an engaging story, but there's times where it's like, and the misogyny, and living in Chicago where it's like, it doesn't take you 10 minutes to get anywhere. Like, it's not gonna happen.
If he's wearing crappy old cowboy boots, maybe, as Dresden is always want to do.
If he can fly and not take public transit of any sort. Yeah, like those are the worlds that bring something special to what we have and what we know. I just got to work with Kevin J. Anderson on his most recent Kickstarter. And he's the author of the Dune books and has done Star Wars and not the original Dune books. I need to clarify that. But and Star Wars and X-Files and like he's had this huge career and impacted sci-fi in a huge way. And like, let's do more media and film and games that take place and play in these worlds by these authors that write a whole lot better than your script writers do. So.
Well, and also that breaks the Ouroboros of reboot and rewrite. And it's this we just talked about books, and that's going to the final segment I have. Those who have stuck around, thank you. This is when people who like the same things riff. But I have way too many favorite books, but one that I recently picked up because it took me so much by surprise was Rebecca Roanhorse's Trail of Lightning. Because I picked it up on a whim. Because I finished Dresden Files as it currently stands, and I was like, I need something. And this is one of those things. They say don't judge a book by its cover, but the cover has like the lightning bolt on it is foil and it's shiny, and my goblin brain went ooh. But I picked it up, and normally I'm not huge into post-apocalypses or young adult books or mixtures of both, because that was kind of all you could read when back when the zombie apocalypse thing was really popular. But this took me by surprise because it tells it through. First, the author is First Nation, I believe Navajo. If I'm not, Rebecca, I'm sorry. But it's told through the eyes of a young DNA Ta monster hunter. It takes place in the Sixth World, and in Native American folklore, the world goes through phases. I believe like the even worlds have magic, and so it's our world after a climate catastrophe, and there's monsters everywhere, and like the people have their magic back, but there's also like monsters and gods. And one of my favorite mythological figures, Coyote himself, shows up, and he's the best. I found this I was flabbergasted because these are normally isn't kind of book I'd pick up, but I did, and I couldn't put it down. The Rebecca's narrative voice, very well done, and it was one of those things where in reading it, she uses actual Dene Navajo dialect, which I would have to stop and like I don't know what that means. And it came to a point where once I read that, I have no idea how that sounds. The audiobook, also fantastic, very well read. Also helps me to be like, that's how that word sounds. So
Yes.
yeah, so I don't go and like try and pronounce it and sound like I'm choking on a sandal or something. No, but it's
words can be a really tricky thing. I mean, Paladin versus Paladine. I couldn't work out which one it was. So yeah, but that sounds like a great one.
No, I thoroughly recommend it. There's a second book out there I've yet to pick up. There's a Storm of Locusts. But it's because when they said it's the Sixth World Chronicles or the Sixth World series, and like I know Shadowrun lore. I know what the start of that. It's just there's like super well done. It was a hidden gem sadly I couldn't find like more of the book at the Barnes and Noble shelf. So like I encourage for those, if you were looking for to change your reader's palette and try something new, give it a shot. Go ahead.
And speaking of book recommendations, I love this idea of having like the book segment.
Yeah.
I'm a big reader too. I do an interview show every week on Gen Con TV, and I've had a bunch of authors, and I now have like 275 books I need to order and read because they all sound fascinating. But just to start with right now, those that don't know, hi. I produce the audiobooks for Catalyst and for the Shadowrun line. And so we've got 30 audiobooks in production. We've got a new one that's about to come out. We're looking at like possibly even monthly releases this year. And we're putting together, for those who know the Shadowrun Hong Kong video game, it was novelized. Yeah, it was novelized by one of the authors. And then we are now turning that into a full audio drama. And we've got some big names in gaming and in voice acting on it. We've got George Ledoux, who is in Mech Warrior as Duncan Fisher. We've got some of the R vocalists who, right after the game came out, did a playthrough. And so like he's like the voice of Duncan Wu, who is Trendane Sparks. We've got Stephanie Shea, who was the original Sailor Moon. We've got... Wow. We've got Jason Charles Miller, who is a voice actor and talented musician who produced the Final Fantasy XIV soundtrack and wrote the first two theme songs for the first two seasons of Critical Role.
Wow.
We've got a lot of people on board who are just phenomenal. So grab yourself a copy of that book or play the game and be ready for the audio line. But all of the Shadowrun fiction is... I haven't picked up one yet where I'm like, meh. I really like Dark Resonance by Phaedra Weldon, and that helped me speak Technomancer a little better. But yeah, the stakes are always high for Shadowrunners, and so I really recommend the fiction line. And I have a couple other books that are on my shelf that I'm about to pick up that are non-Shadowrun. So for next month, I'll recommend those.
Excellent. Gomi, do you have a book you want to? Any recommendations on your end, or?
Well, I'm currently reading Stephen Fry's stuff on Greek mythology. So Stephen Fry, if you know Fry and Laurie, but Stephen, I think he showed him as Mycroft in one of the Sherlock Holmes movies. But comedians from the 70s and 80s in the UK. And he's got a really dry sense of humour and a really good voice. And so Zeus and Prometheus have just created humans and let them loose on the world. So we'll see what happens next. It's got wonderful little footnotes in, I won't say in the style of Terry Pratchett, but definitely, adding to the story there. The other thing, I mean, there's a couple of things I've been reading at the moment, but that's sort of the main one. Because I have to read too many technical things, so I go through phases of like, I really want to read something completely different, or I just want to read I'll just read something that's sort of a little dry. So at the moment, I'm going through a dry phase. So, but I'll get back to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think, we said it was gonna be a 1 hour show. We're almost at 2. I'll get better at this, I swear. But for those of you who stuck around in chat and have been engaging in chat, thank you. And you're always welcome here. We're always happy to talk nerdy to you. I have been one of your hosts, Alexander Maxwell, and I've been joined by Gomi and Remy. Give your signings off and where they can find you on social media if they can.
I don't exist on social media. Well, yeah, not officially anyway. But yeah, as always, the technology is not evenly distributed. Remy?
Yeah.
You can find me on Facebook, Rem Alternus Productions or Rem Alternus. You can find me on Twitter at Rem Alternus Production or the Rem Alternus. We have a Discord server. We're on Twitch at twitch.tv/Master of Rem. We stream 5 to 6 days a week. I'm also the producer now of the Shadowcasters Network for all of your Shadowrun content. We've got 5th edition games. We've got 6th edition games. We've got podcasts on lore and history. We've got the Arcology with Mr. Johnson for news in the Shadowrun vein. And gosh, what else do we do? So we have those. We have our audiobooks that we work on. We do crowdfunding campaigns for creatives, publishers, writers, game designers. So you should check out our Facebook and our Discord. Get involved, come play with us. We have a streamathon in April, at the end of April. So if you want to just jump on and live stream and game for fun for a weekend, you are welcome to. I'll drop that link in the chat.
Right. And once again, I have been your perpetually disheveled host, Alex Maxwell. You can find me in the Cybernation Uncensored Discord under Maxwell. And at which, if there's anyone in the chat who has corrections for something that I've said that has been inherently wrong, which is always very probable, blonde moments all the time, please at me with links to sources on corrections. I hate spreading misinformation, and I will own up to whatever mistakes and corrections when I do the show next. Until then, it is late for some of us and even later for others. I thank you for my fellow hosts for joining me on this ride, and look forward to doing this again next month. And until then, I'll be seeing you all later. Bye, everybody.
Cybernation Uncensored.